Astronauts to the moon.
Ignition sequence start. 3, 2, 1.
Houston, we have a problem.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue.
What you're seeing here is a mirage.
What's going on, everyone? It's Jeranism, back with another video for you today. Let's discuss the moon landings, or the lack thereof. I find it so important because if NASA went to the moon, then they know it all. The size of the sun, the distance, the gravity, the orbits. They know it all. But if we didn't go, well, that changes it all. Let's read a quote here first to start off. One of the saddest lessons of history is this. If we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back. Surprisingly, that quote is from Carl Sagan. Of course, he is talking about religion and how we were fooled, and then when we are confronted with the evidence of the bamboozle, we reject it. It's just too painful to acknowledge. But truth be told, science can also pull off a bamboozle of its own, especially if they were able to put something in textbooks and then call anyone who questions it a nut job. Here's another great quote from Carl Sagan. Finding the occasional straw of truth awash in a great ocean of confusion and bamboozle requires intelligence, vigilance, dedication, and courage. But if we don't practice these tough habits of thought, we cannot hope to solve the truly serious problems that face us, and we risk becoming a nation of suckers up for grabs by the next charlatan who comes along. And finally, a third quote from Sagan. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we are up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes rambling along. And so that's what I'm doing. Being skeptical, asking questions. Like, why are the facts around the moon landing easily forgotten? Let's start with Neil Armstrong and his greatest memory, that first step. One small step. It was a step, right? Or was it a leap? Let's see if he can recall.
Men walk on moon. The stage, the scene was this. Sunday, July 20th, as for the first time in our world's history, at 4:18, landing on the moon. After several hours in the module, at 10:56 p.m., one Neil Armstrong emerged, stepped down, placed his foot on the moon, and said,
"One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
And why did you say those words, Neil Armstrong?
Well, it was a natural thing. It was a step off the lunar module, a very short step, only about 6 inches down from the step. But more than 1/3 of Americans had been working for a decade to make this happen, and it had been a lifelong dream, so it was a big step for all of those people.
So you may have noticed there that Armstrong said that more than 1/3 of Americans had worked for a decade to make this happen, and that it was a big step for all of those people. He also says it was a small 6-inch step. Now listen to this.
Okay, I can leave that 1 foot up there and both hands down to about the 4th rung up. There you go. Okay, now I think I'll do the same. A little more. About another inch. There, you got it? That's a good step. Yep. About a 3-footer.
Very short step, only about 6 inches down from the step.
That's a good step. Yep. About a 3-footer.
About 6 inches.
About a 3-footer.
About 6 inches.
About a 3-footer.
About 6 inches.
Beautiful, beautiful. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here. Magnificent desolation.
Well, that sure is interesting. 3 feet or 6 inches. It was definitely one or the other, I guess. Let's talk briefly about Marion Moon, Buzz Aldrin's mother, who committed suicide a year prior to the television spectacle called the moon landings because she was worried about the fame that would follow Buzz. Now, let's stop and think. So a year prior to Buzz going to the moon, his mother kills herself because her son will soon have fame and media will be all around. To me, that just doesn't make sense. Would a mother possibly cost her son his trip to the moon by killing herself? Well, she did, and days before the Apollo trip, during a press conference, the 3 astronauts are asked,
I wondered if each of the 3 could tell us very briefly how your families have reacted to the fact that you're taking this historic mission.
Well, who wants to take a crack?
Well, I think my particular case, my family has had 5 years now to become accustomed to this eventuality, and over 6 months to face it quite closely. And I think they look on this as a tremendous challenge for me. They look upon it also as an invasion somewhat of their privacy and a removing of my presence away from the family for a considerable period of time. I'm not sure exactly whether this is the overriding feature over and above some of the other more pleasant aspects of the particular job that I have as far as it affects my family.
And so that was an interesting answer. Of course, he can't say his mother committed suicide because Buzz and his family, according to Buzz's book, told the coroner to lie about his mother's death and to say it was heart problems, and then only after the fact did Buzz come out and say that his mother, much like his grandfather, committed suicide. The lie was to make sure that there was no unneeded press attention brought upon Buzz or his family, but it's proof to me that lies are no big deal to Buzz Aldrin. Also, just wanted to point out on this timeline that they launched July 16th at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time and landed July 20th, a Sunday, almost 4.5 days later. The first step on the moon was 6.5 hours after that, and then they launched from the moon July 21st, 1969 at 1:34 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time and splashed in the ocean 3 days later on the 24th of July at 12:50 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. An estimated 600 million people watched the Apollo moon landings live on TV, a record that stood until the wedding of Princess Diana in 1981. Remember, they wanted everyone watching live, and that's why Nixon made the federal and state governments, as well as city employers, give employees the day off on July 21st. So let's think. Do you really think the government would want people watching live if something were to go terribly wrong? What an embarrassment if this great moon race was capped off with a huge American disaster as the lunar module crashes to the moon while millions of Americans watch live with their young children. No, isn't going to happen. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew everything would be just fine. And remember, we went to the moon 6 times during a span of 4 years. And how many presidents were in office for all those moon landings? Do you remember? Nixon? You're right. There was one. Just Dick Nixon.
I welcome this kind of examination because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
And remember, Aldrin, Collins, and Armstrong would not even swear on the Bible that they went to the moon. Armstrong was even offered $5,000 cash to swear on the Bible that he could have given to charity. He declined, saying to Sibrel, "Knowing you, Mr. Sibrel, that's probably a fake Bible," which makes 0 sense. And you can add to that the fact that every Apollo mission made its own patch, and all of them were filled with their names, except Apollo 11. Again, important to point out the launch day of July 16, 1969, and the importance of Stanley Kubrick writing into his contract that he wanted Eyes Wide Shut to be released on July 16, 1999, the 30-year anniversary of the Apollo launch. Now, that did happen, but Kubrick didn't get to see that happen as he died on March 7th, 1999, which was only 4 days after he showed the trial cut to Warner Brothers and 6 days after he showed it to the stars and his family. So one interesting thing is that March 7th, 1999 is the 66th day of that year. Also interesting is from that date of March 7th, 1999 until the end of 2000, the end of the millennium, was exactly 666 days. The next day being 1/1/2001, and of course we all remember Stanley Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey. So yes, 666 days until the start of the new millennium. Now some people might say, wait a second, the new millennium started January 1st, 2000. But that's not exactly correct. Remember, 1999 and 2000 are both a part of the 20th century. We're now in the 21st century because the last year of this century will be 2100. Just look at it this way. To make a millennium, you need 1,000 years. So 1,000 is included with the years 1 through 199. That gives us the first 1,000 years. So 2000 is included with the second 1,000. 1001 through 1999 plus 2000 equals another 1,000 years. So the question becomes, why did Kubrick want the movie released on July 16, 1999, which is 30 years to the day that Apollo launched for the moon? And another question for NASA fans, space fans, Mars or Elon Musk fans, why? No, I'm just kidding. If an asteroid or meteor were to hit Earth and it was big enough, humanity could be gone, right? Just like that. So everyone says we have to colonize Mars, but nobody asks, why in the world would we not have a base with 20 or 30 people on the moon? Think about it, because these are important questions. We've been there 6 times, and this would protect humanity from destruction. If a giant meteor ever hit Earth, we'd be able to repopulate. But we have no moon base. Why not? Well, pretty simple, because we can't go. That's why. And we already talked about Buzz's mom, but we didn't discuss Armstrong and his becoming a recluse when he returned from the moon, seemingly honoring all his NASA commitments, but not granting personal or private interviews. And Neil just acted funny, including in 1994 when Hallmark made an anniversary ornament with Neil's likeness and a soundbite of his famous first words on the moon. Neil promptly sued Hallmark for the use of his likeness. He isn't the only one. Buzz sued Topps in 2009 for including him in the American Heroes series. Topps argued that the historical images were simply protected as free speech. Luckily, the judge agreed, stating that the images were protected as free speech and a matter of issue of public interest. Buzz had no problem selling his slide rule, his underwear, and even pocket change that he supposedly took to the moon, however. What a class act. Aaron Rainon made a good little documentary called Did We Go?, when the state of Ohio paid him to spend a year trying to prove we went to the moon. Here's a short clip from when he went to Neil's hometown attempting to speak to him. There's a link in the description that will take you to Aaron Rainon's YouTube page.
All right, 5 till 2 at 700 WLW. Mike McConnell, guest again, Mr. Aaron Rainon. Making a documentary film trying to prove we went to the moon, and it's not all that easy to do, apparently. Our lines are jammed. Everything but the Neil Armstrong hotline, which today only is 749-3700. You have about 5 minutes left, Neil, to check in if you can. Donna, how are you?
I believe we went to the moon.
What proof do you have?
Well, I don't have any, but I just, in my heart, I believe that we did, and I don't think the American government would think that the American people would be that stupid.
What have you uncovered, Aaron?
Well, I am trying to prove it. And really, I can't find any hard evidence. But I thought it was going to be an easy thing to prove. Suddenly we have...
It's not all that provable.
It's not that provable. With no luck at the radio station, I head to Wapakoneta, Ohio, birthplace of Neil Armstrong and his boyhood home. Did you know Neil Armstrong?
I don't want to make any commitments.
Oh, have you met? You knew Neil Armstrong? What was he like?
Nice guy.
Can I talk to you about it just for a sec?
I don't think so. I'm busy right now. I'm leaving.
Okay. I'm sorry. Did you ever meet Neil Armstrong?
Yeah.
How would you describe Neil?
I have
no words for that. I don't know who you are, so I'm not there. I just met him.
Why are people putting up a wall between me and Neil?
Next, we have a rare Neil appearance to discuss the budget concerns. Listen carefully and try to count the uhs. So, here's Neil.
About a year and a half ago, the president announced a budget for the space program that included canceling the manned exploration components of our program. And we were, the three of us were all very concerned about that and made our concerns known to the public and to the Congress and to the administration. And so thanks to interest in the Congress, they set about modifying the authorizations and appropriations to complete as much exploration matters as they thought would be conceivable with the budget available. That's the work in progress right now. We have made some progress. We will, the three of us and many others of our colleagues are going to be continuing to express our hopes and perhaps change the course of our NASA policy. The simplest part is that we have spent, we collectively, our nation and our citizenry has invested a half a century of their best intellects and their best perseverance and their best determination and a lot of taxpayer resources to become a leader, establish a leadership position in the space arena. And we recognize that for any organization to maintain a leadership position requires that they continue doing their job very well. And so the fact that we essentially right now have a space station which is built by funds of many nations, but more than 90% came from the United States, and it's an enormous expenditure to build that space station and not have any access for ourselves. We have no access right now. The United States has no access to take our people to that space station and back, or to go any other place. And we'll have no such access for a substantial period of number of years in the future is very, very discouraging to those of us who think this was a very good investment for Americans and their colleagues in the international community over the past decades. So we're going to keep working on it,
Yeah, man, that's too bad. No access to space. Poor babies. All we need to do is actually think about the things that NASA does, and that should prove that they're nothing more than tax money thieves. For example, the shuttles. Enterprise, which could never even go to space, Columbia, Challenger, Discovery, Atlantis, and Endeavour were all made, 2 of which were destroyed, but at a total cost of $200+ billion. These NASA-designed orbiters could actually do everything you needed it to do. Think about it. We had a vehicle that could go to space. It could get into orbit. It could dock with the ISS. It could fix satellites and do all that's needed, except get more money. Those shuttles, they suck. We can't get more funding with these things. Scrap them. This way we can ask for more funding. I mean, just think about it. Who in their right mind would just get rid of the shuttle and then go around complaining that we have no access to space? It's not my fault. We're now going to listen to Jim Lovell And listen carefully because he gives away the secret that you can hear almost from every astronaut, from Neil deGrasse, all these guys. They'll tell you the truth of why we have the space program right here if you listen carefully.
Other than the prestige that we all got from the space program, it was the spur to education for the young people. The three of us, almost every week, meet people now in their late 40s or early 50s who were, youngsters when we were doing the flying, who spurred them on to, become engineers or doctors or businessmen, anyway, to improve their careers. This is the one thing when the space program becomes a thing of the past that we're going to lose, is not just what we can accomplish in space, but also what it does to our young people that are growing up to want to follow through and do something that they think they really would love to pursue.
Now, before we move on to the live ABC broadcast, I have a question. Astronauts are weightless because they're falling, right? And missing the curvature of Earth. They're falling around the curvature, which keeps them in orbit. Okay, I get that. So I wonder, why did they float on the way to the moon? Well, let's see if this educational film will help us at all. And again, I say, as I say all the time, don't trust me on any of this. You need to do your own research. Some people out there, fans of science, don't like questions being asked. They don't like you doubting or questioning the almighty NASA. But I, on the other hand, think it's quite important to ask as many questions as possible. And the first, why did they float on the way to the moon?
Another thing you should know is we just don't float around on the orbiter because there is no gravity. We still feel Earth's gravity. So why are we floating? Because we're falling. Let's say the string is gravity. And let's say this apple is like a spaceship orbiting the Earth. You see, it's gravity and our speed that keeps us in orbit. Without gravity, we would fly off into space and never come back.
Here's another example. When I drop this apple on Earth, it falls. When I drop an apple here on the space shuttle, it falls too. It just doesn't look like it's falling. And that's because we're all falling together. The apple, me, and the orbiter. But we're not falling towards the Earth, we're falling around it. Let's imagine that we can send Bruce down to the nearest elevator on Earth. The elevator is going to the top of a very tall building. Suddenly, when he reaches the top, the cable breaks, and the elevator car with Bruce in it begins to fall. What will happen inside the elevator? Well, since he's falling, and the elevator is falling at the same rate, he starts to float. His body isn't pushing on the inside of the elevator anymore. He has no weight. He's weightless. If he had an apple with him, it would float too, just like the one in the orbiter, because Bruce, the apple, and the elevator would all be falling together.
So, I don't get it. Why do astronauts float on the way to the moon? Perhaps I missed the explanation there. So, I went to Ask an Astronaut to find the answer. And the question was, if astronauts float in Earth orbit because they are falling to Earth, why do astronauts experience zero gravity en route to the moon? Thank you, Phil Gartner. The answer from the astronaut? The common situation for the astronauts is that in both cases they are in free fall, falling solely under the influence of gravity. When I was on the shuttle, I was falling around the Earth under its gravitational tug. Same for ISS astronauts today. They fall towards the center of Earth, but their speed is such that their curved falling path carries them around the curved surface of the Earth. They never hit the ground, fortunately. The Apollo astronauts, on their way to and from the moon, were still in an Earth orbit, still falling around the Earth. When close to the moon, they fell under its gravitational tug and entered lunar orbit, thus falling around our natural satellite in the same way. A Mars-bound spacecraft is actually falling around the Sun in a solar orbit, until it encounters the gravitational field of the red planet. In each case, astronauts experience freefall. So I don't get it. All we got to do is look at this. I understand orbits going around the Earth, missing the curvature. Okay, got it. But now we head off towards the moon and we're still falling around the Earth? Missing the curve. I don't get it. Anybody else? Please inform me, because I think it's just, I don't know. I think Lawrence Krauss best describes NASA.
And as I was saying to someone else the other day, NASA doesn't know its ass from a hole in the ground when it comes to fundamental physics. I mean, really, it embarrasses me and offends me.
Hey, that's cool. We do have something in common. It embarrasses and offends me as well. So let's now watch the ABC live telecast, and we'll start with the ill-advised words spoken years ago that started this whole theft agency in motion. We choose to lie to people.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
And if that goal proves to be difficult or impossible at best, then we will take our energy and kill anyone who challenges or is unwilling to accept. That one will have his head blown, and we'll put Johnson in. So fuck you.
ABC News presents Footsteps on the Moon, the flight of Apollo 11.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Frank Reynolds at ABC Space Headquarters in New York. It is July 16th, 1969, and we are all about to witness the fulfillment of that promise that President Kennedy made at Rice University Stadium in Texas on September 12th, 1962. The moon that still has not set in some parts of our world has only a few more days of what you might call untrammeled history. These three men are about to embark on certainly one of history's most glorious adventures. Commander Neil Armstrong, Lunar Module Pilot Buzz Aldrin, and Command Module Pilot Mike Collins.
And so we'll now watch a few of these segments, and many times I'll be chiming in to point out the hilarious. We just saw Frank Reynolds.
This time, we do it my way.
No, not that Frank Reynolds. And coming up next, Jules Bergman.
Good morning, Frank. We're at T-minus 2 hours and 28 minutes into the scheduled launch of Apollo 11 at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And the countdown has been going spectacularly until about 10 minutes ago, just before Neil Armstrong, Mike Collins, and Buzz Aldrin started to get into the cabin of Apollo 11. And then a slight leak developed in a valve system that replenishes the liquid hydrogen for the third stage of the Saturn V, the S4B stage. The valve in question is not on the spacecraft itself, but on GSE, or ground support equipment. It's the same valve, the very same valve, by the way, that leaked back on Apollo 10. Everything else here, Frank, is holding up very well. There's a forecast of clouds at 15,000 feet. As we look back to pad 39, right directly behind our ABC News Space Headquarters here at the Cape, you can see the clouds over the ocean. They haven't yet truly developed over the land area, and if it stays this way, everyone in the country and millions of people gathered around Central Florida will get a spectacular eyewitness view of Apollo 11 and the Saturn V lifting off.
And one of the coolest parts of the Apollo 11 launch was the see-through rocket, the see-through Saturn V. Pretty amazing technology.
Led by security guards, waving a farewell.
So if you watch here, you'll see Buzz, Neil, and Mike coming down these steps, but if you look behind them and to the right, and I'll play it again here so you can see, there's two other guys that seem to be ducking behind that bus. They're wearing some sort of plastic silver suit, some Mylar guys, I don't know. Pretty strange. Anyone know who they are or what they're trying to hide?
We're back at ABC Space Headquarters in New York.
I'm sorry, that's just funny. ABC Space Headquarters in New York.
The commander of the mission is 38-year-old Neil Armstrong, the only civilian among the three-man crew.
How is Neil a civilian? He was in the Navy, and he fought in the Korean War and flew 78 missions. That'd be like saying Barry Bonds is an amateur baseball player.
The pilot of the lunar landing module is Edwin Aldrin, Jr., 39 years old and an Air Force colonel. 38-year-old Michael Collins, a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, is the pilot of the command module. It will be his job to circle the moon while Armstrong and Aldrin are down on its surface.
All going very smoothly here with the count. Among the distinguished visitors here this morning, along with Vice President Spiro Agnew, is the former President Lyndon Johnson. There's our live picture from the VIP stands on the other side of the VAB and Launch Control Center. Behind the former President is former NASA Administrator James Webb, sitting in the picture, and many other dignitaries gathered there. Some 8,000 dignitaries in all invited by the Space Agency as guests.
8,000? I circled the grandstands here. I think they might seat 80, possibly 90 people. Here's a view from the parking lot, and you can see underneath that red arrow way back there, that's your little launch complex. So good seats, you get to see everything. Here's the view from above the media tent. You can see that distance is about 3.5 or 4 miles to the launch complex there. Let's have Jules Bergman tell us how this all works. The Apollo 11 craft and rocket.
Apollo 11 contains the lunar module, or LEM, which will weigh more than 32,000 pounds at launch time. The command module serves as a flight operations center and living quarters for the astronauts. After the third stage rocket sends Apollo 11 toward the moon, the onboard service module engine will be used to put the astronauts into lunar orbit and later to return them home to Earth. The total payload, nearly 100,000 pounds, rests on a Saturn V rocket. The first stage generates 7.5 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. The second stage will carry the Apollo spacecraft and astronauts to an altitude of 100 miles. And then the third stage breaks Apollo 11 out of Earth orbit and propels the astronauts toward the moon. And this is what Eagle, the lunar module on Apollo 11, will look like after its legs are, its gear is put down after translunar flight has begun and as it heads toward the moon. In addition to this black and white covering, of course, it's covered by gold and black thermal foil, if you will, mylar foil, and black foil to protect it from heating as it heads around into lunar orbit and then down toward its descent on the moon. But essentially, that's what the vehicle looks like, a very ungainly machine. The astronauts still call it a thin, light-walled flying machine, a thin, light-walled structure, but it has proven to be one heck of a good flying machine on 2 flights now, Apollo 9 and Apollo 10.
Even Jules can barely describe it. See him giggling? Gold and black, thermal mylar foil. It's an ungainly machine. I guess homeless tweaker shelter wouldn't have gone over too well. If you think the LEM could descend to the moon and break with no atmosphere, you are what they call a fanboy. Or girl. Fanboy or girl.
And counting. Neil Armstrong just reported back. It's been a real smooth countdown. We passed the 50-second mark. Power transfer is complete. We're on internal power with the launch vehicle at this time.
A few things I want you to watch on this takeoff. Watch the rocket, the Saturn V, as it takes off, and you'll notice that it takes off and kind of starts going sideways, lifts a little bit more, it's a little more sideways, and all of a sudden they switch cameras and it's right back. I'm going to call bullshit. Also, keep an eye on the speed as it takes off from the pad, and Jules Bergman makes a little joke that it's moving slowly.
40 seconds away from the Apollo 11 liftoff. All the second stage tanks now pressurized. 35 seconds and counting. We are still go with Apollo 11. 30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
We got a roll program. pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading.
Slowly, but gathering speed. Going beautifully, burning hot.
Plus 30 seconds.
Roll complete and efficient program.
How was it roll complete if it never rolled? Burning hot and burning true. Whatever the hell that means, Bergman. So fake. You'll see a strange shadow here in a second. Pretty interesting. It's always switching cameras, going back and forth. It just looks disgusting. I'm not sure how people can watch this and believe that it's a rocket, there was the shadow part, with astronauts aboard. I mean, give me a frickin' break. I mean, listen to Neil talk here. He's got no elevated heart rate, no jump in his voice, no rattling. Just cool as a hoaxer can be. Congratulations, Mr. Armstrong. Fine job indeed. Just watch the changes in the plume of smoke and the rocket angle for the next few seconds. I mean, we've got it almost going vertical here. Go ahead and keep an eye on it from this point on.
Inboard cutoff. Inboard engines out. I'm inboard cutoff.
Inboard cutoff exactly on schedule. Apollo 11 now 3,000 miles, now doing 3,650 miles an hour. 8.
Downrange 35 miles, 30 miles high. Standing by for the outboard engine cut down now. Staging. And ignition.
Armstrong reporting staging and ignition. The first stage engines have burned out exactly on schedule. The second stage engines have lit off.
Houston, thrusters go. All engines, you're looking good. All right, Roger, you're loud and clear.
Jules has something to say here. Very funny and very true. And it's still the case for me today.
Still in sight from our long-range cameras. Burning hot, straight and true all the way. Toward a moon 218,000 miles distant. A moment many Americans, many people never believed could happen or would happen.
I still don't.
190 miles downrange now, 72 miles high, velocity 11,000 feet per second.
And the first major hurdles have been passed for Apollo 11. All going very, very well. The first minutes of a 195-hour-long flight, ticking off almost without tension, almost like a regular airliner takeoff, but for the thunderous roar of the flame of the Saturn.
Booster says it's looking good at 5 minutes. Well, then, Houston, you are go at 5 minutes. Roger, Apollo 11, go.
We're hearing Neil Armstrong live, reporting back to booster control, Capcom in mission control.
270 miles, altitude 82 miles, velocity 12,472 feet per second. Fly to S4B to COI capability. Okay.
That's 9,000 miles an hour.
S4B to COI capability.
That's 9,000 miles an hour. Confirmation that the
Apollo 11 could now get into orbit using the S4B if necessary. In your living room. Thank you. You all are coming through beautifully, too.
Very clear communications this morning. Very clear air-to-ground from Apollo 11. That's Capcom Bruce McCandless. You hear talking from Houston Mission Control. And occasionally Flight Director Cliff Charlesworth in the background.
And occasionally Neil Armstrong from in a basement somewhere. I wonder why the communications are working so well. Moon landing.
Picture finally. Our cameras are now at pad 39, viewing that water deluge or dowsing system we told you about. Hundreds of thousands of gallons of water, saving the pad from being all but wiped out by the heat and the flame. When the third stage is fired, the astronauts will then be inserted into an Earth parking orbit. The guidance system has already computed the trajectory needed to intercept the moon. The confirmation of that trajectory or course will be relayed by Houston to the astronauts. 2 hours and 40 minutes after launch over the Pacific, the third stage engine will be restarted, and when an escape velocity of nearly 25,000 miles per hour is reached, Apollo 11 will be injected into a translunar trajectory. Soon after, the panels of the spacecraft's lunar module adapter are jettisoned. The Apollo Command and Service Module then separates from the booster. The astronauts start the docking maneuver, rotating Apollo 180 degrees, and then, using their small thruster rockets, dock with the LEM. The third stage will be jettisoned when the docking maneuver is completed about 2 hours after translunar injection. The astronauts, using star sightings backed up by mission control, guidance radar, and computers, then work up the data to make mid-course corrections and set their course to intercept the moon 3 days later. Depending on how accurate the rocket engine burns to get away from Earth, none or as many as 3 mid-course corrections may be needed. Apollo's speed decreases from 25,000 to less than 4,000 miles per hour en route. Then, near the moon, as lunar gravity begins to exert its influence, the speed of the spacecraft increases up to 6,000 miles per hour.
All right, we now have a picture from Apollo 11, so let's go to Houston for the conversation between the spacecraft and Houston, and we'll see these pictures. There's the Earth.
The Earth from 130,000 nautical, or about 149,000 statute miles.
150,000 miles. Does anyone believe they actually live there? The ball Earth, just floating in the blackness of space due to gravity, with no stars. Yeah, I know. Earth is so bright, can't see any of the stars. You see, somebody keeps getting in the way. It was a shot. I think they'd get out of the way since they're faking this. This, folks, is fake. Uh-oh. Watch out. The blackness of space is overtaking part of the Earth. How could that possibly happen? With the camera up against the window. How could something black get in the way of the Earth? I wonder. Alright, and now what I'm going to do is prove that this was not filmed live. It was broadcast on ABC as if it were live, but we're going to match it up with the transcript and show clearly that there is a whole bunch of conversation that has been taken out. So see if you can follow along with this transcript.
All right, we now have a picture from Apollo 11, so let's go to Houston for the conversation between the spacecraft and Houston, and we'll see these pictures. There's the Earth.
The Earth from 130,000 nautical, or about 149,000 statute miles.
Roger, you're seeing Earth as we see it at our left-hand window, just a little more than a half Earth. We're looking at the eastern Pacific Ocean, and the north half of the top half of the screen we can see North America, Alaska, United States, Canada, Mexico, and Central America. South America becomes invisible just off beyond the terminator or inside the shadow. We can see the oceans with a definite blue cast, see white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth, and can see coastlines that got the western U.S., San Joaquin Valley, the Sierra Mountain Range, the peninsula of Baja California, and can see some cloud formations over southeastern U.S. There's one definite mild storm southwest of Alaska, looks like about 500 to 1,000 miles, and another very minor storm showing the south end of the screen near the a long way south of the equator, probably 45 degrees or more south latitude.
Okay, so what you'll see here is he stopped at the word latitude, and you'll see more text, can pick out the browns and the landforms pretty well. And then these other additional pages have all been omitted, yet this was the live footage shown on ABC. And you'll see about 4 pages of text have been missing, and then it will pick up again with them saying they can see the Earth out the window.
We were saying, Cliff Charlesworth said...
we can still see the Earth through the left window, and it appears that we can see a floodlight off to the left, either that or some sun shafting through the hatch window.
Almost looks like 2 Earths.
That's a floodlight. Now we're coming in. Can't quite make out who that had. That's Big Mike Collins there. Well, you got a little bit of... Yeah, hello there, Split Fans. You got a little bit of me, plus Neil's in the center couch, and Buzz is doing the camera work this time. Roger, it's a little dark now, 11. Maybe a bigger f-stop might help. Yeah, that didn't work. It's getting a lot better now, 11. Mike, you coming in 5 by. I got a good... Well, I put on a coat and tie if I'd known about this ahead of time. Is Buzz holding your cue cards for you, over?
And we're going to discuss that in 1 second, but let's take a look at this. So, if you watch carefully, you'll actually see that they are faking this shot. As the camera clears up here, you'll see what they're doing. They're recording from one side of the craft out the opposite window. So imagine being in an airplane and shooting video with the lights out of the opposite side. Now you'd have to black out the other windows, but clearly it's possible. Because if you look carefully, you'll actually see that bright light coming through there, which is probably the sun or could be the Earth, but you'll also see the Earth down here in a little bit. Remember, they're 150,000 miles out. And you'll see that bright light coming in there and the Earth light there coming in your lower right. Let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. So let's say we jump in a plane like this, and you'll see I kind of blacked out or covered up the other windows, so we just have one circular window. And then what we can do is turn off the lights. So once the lights are out, all of a sudden we have something that looks kind of like the Earth. And we could use the actual picture of the Earth below us like this, and then we could even use a cardboard cutout and create kind of a phase like this. But I think what would be even easier is to just use the brightness of the daytime sky. So for here, we're just looking out this window at the blue sky. And then what you do is you create some transparencies. You can create different phases. You can create different sections of the Earth. Then all you need to do is slide one of these transparencies over the window. So see here we slid the phase Earth over the window. And that looks pretty impressive. Here you can see we take the other one instead. Or this is still the phase. In a second we'll take the full Earth and try that as well. And all we had to do was just cover up and black out all the windows but one. Then shut off the lights and film from the other side. So you'll see here we put the full Earth there. Now it's just a transparency slid right over. And voila. The only problem is there's no stars. And you just got to make sure nobody turns on the lights of the airplane, as we just saw them do. Now, of course, to get rid of the star problem, lucky for us, we're NASA, and we can just tell people the stars don't show up in our pictures. Sorry, and half the astronauts will say they've never seen them, and the other half will say they do. And people will argue across the world on your behalf, so it's really not even that difficult of a deception. Now, this next part is very interesting. I'm going to have on the screen the transcript of the Apollo 11 trip so we can read the text at the same time as listening to the audio, and you'll notice that they omitted something pretty significant. I don't know why they do this. It just gives us more evidence, but they've done it, so listen carefully.
It's getting a lot better now, 11. Mike, you coming in 5 by. I got a good... Well, I put on a coat and tie if I'd known about this ahead of time. Is Buzz holding your cue cards for you over? Cue cards have a no. We have... We are very comfortable up here, though. We do have a happy home. There's plenty of room for the three of us, and I think we're all learning to find our favorite little corner to sit in. The zero G is very comfortable, but...
So we'll watch this one more time.
It's getting a lot better now, 11. Mike, you coming in?
Mike says, I would have put a coat and tie on if I'd known ahead of time. Then they ask, is Buzz holding your cue cards for you? And he says, cue cards have a no. We have no intention of competing with the professionals, believe me. Removed from the video feed that was live on ABC. Probably because, let's see here, who uses cue cards? Pretty sure actors use cue cards. And I'm pretty sure they just said we have no intention on competing with the professionals, which means they are acting as actors.
Jump in, and that seems more at home. Roger, it looks like Neil is coming in 5 by there. 11, Mike, see you in the background. The definition is really outstanding. The colors are good. It's a real good picture we're getting here of the Commander Armstrong.
And if you want to see the remainder of the ABC live telecast, I have the link in the description so you can check it out, but we're going to move on.
Good afternoon once again. We are, in fact, about to see more pictures now from of the lunar surface from Apollo 11. With me here in our space headquarters in New York is our science editor, Jules Bergman. Jules, these should be interesting shots.
Frank, Apollo 11 is now on the near side of the moon, coming up on the Sea of Tranquility, the landing area where Armstrong and Aldrin are scheduled to land tomorrow at an altitude of 102 miles, and we're just getting the TV picture. Let's go to it for Apollo control.
Apollo control, Houston. We acquired TV at 78 hours, 24 minutes, 11 seconds. Currently, our orbital parameters show 104. Altitude, an apolloon of 170.2, a paraloon of 61.3 nautical miles, those are.
Now remember exactly what we are seeing here, or recognize at least what they say we're seeing here. This is a film of the lunar surface as the craft is going by in orbit at 4,000 miles per hour and 110 miles in altitude. Let's take a close look and see if it matches.
Ignition. This is equivalent to 13 minutes before ignition, and we're at about 80 degrees east, I guess. 83 degrees east. Would that correspond to location you're holding in, President? Roger, we're showing your present position is about 76 degrees east, looking back towards the east.
So now look at this and ask yourself, is this what it would look like if you were going 4,000 to 6,000 miles per hour, only 110 miles from the surface of the moon? It looks to me to be either a view through a telescope, possibly, or the filming of a giant model of the moon. And of course, many people have seen the model of the moon and the track that NASA had built in the late 60s. Pay attention to the lower right-hand side right now, and you're going to see almost a masked out something. See here, it turns white and then kind of disappears. Very interesting there. But yeah, let me show you some models of the moon that NASA had built, and you tell me if that's all that we're looking at here. Certainly doesn't seem like it's the surface of the moon. And so, just showing you quickly some of these images of these artists who were hired by NASA to paint an exact replica of the moon. You also see this one here, where this artist is making sure to get every single detail so that it can look as real as possible, which I see no reason for, unless, of course, you're going to fake the world. In this image here, something interesting, you see the track behind this artist. You could easily put a wheeled camera and get the same orbiting pictures that we're looking at now.
Apollo 11 now flying
I'll show you an altitude now of about 110 miles, and of course you'd be considerably lower at the initiation of powered descent.
This is exactly the same territory Eagle, the lunar module, will be flying over tomorrow as it begins its powered descent toward a landing on Lunar Landing Site 2, now about 100 miles to the west of where we are.
Look at register 3 on the Diski theta. Theta is increasing toward my desired 315, and I'll let the hand controller alone here, and I'll bet you it reverses itself.
They're just now passing out of Smythe Sea, heading along the lunar equator toward the Sea of Tranquility. And we should be seeing the craters Gilbert and Kastner shortly to the south of their flight path.
Roger 11, we're watching the Diski now, and still coming in beautifully on the TV.
The spacecraft faced around backward, looking back.
Right side of the screen at the present time, there's a triple crater with a small crater between the first and second, and the one at the bottom of the screen is Schubert Y. Zoom in, it does have a central peak in Schubert Y, actually several of them, and you can observe those, but the rim craters at the bottom of your screen. Roger, we're seeing the central peak quite clearly now.
Our view of this tomorrow will be much closer, of course, and be down a good deal closer to the lunar
Okay,
surface.
we're zooming in now on a crater called Schubert N. Schubert N, very conical inside wall, and the bottom appears to be nearly flat. Look at data on the Diski. It's stabilized and is holding steady now. Roger. Looking out the window, I can see a number of small craters on the bottom of Schubert N. We're coming up on the Foaming Sea, where I'll be doing some P-22 marking on a crater of my choice, name of Crater Camp. Okay, we'll be watching for Camp.
Alright, what I've done at this point is I've taken this footage and played it back at 4 times speed to see if we can see anything like we would expect. At 4 times speed, this would be going as fast as the ISS, except that the ISS is at 250 miles high, and this is only 110 miles high. So the ground should be moving considerably faster. Go ahead and ask yourself if you think this looks at all legit. To me, it's just more proof to add to the plethora of evidence that we have, the preponderance of evidence, that's for you, Bob, to show that there's no way this craft is above the moon. Sorry, NASA. Should just tell the truth. And NASA fanboys, I really am sorry, but we should really be proud of things that we've actually done and not hoaxed scientific expeditions that never happened and have been put in school books and textbooks and taught as truth. It's embarrassing. I've also sped up this part, but overall it is simply terrible. How can anyone believe this is the moon, or that this craft is going 4,000 miles per hour, or that they are 110 miles above the surface, or that 6 times 50 years ago we sent humans 240,000 miles with the technology of a Game Boy, that we docked and undocked, landed and launched, conducted phone calls, filmed live footage, and beamed it all back home. That it was so easy, and yet we've never been back? I mean, anybody who thinks those things needs to really research this stuff, or you can just be like Joe Rogan. You can just be a human who has chosen to give up their brain, give up their ability to think, and bow down to the scientific men who are smarter than you. Even though, if science is what we were taught, they'd be more than happy to show us the evidence to prove what they claim. Instead, we get laughed at, we get called moron, yet nobody can supply the evidence that should be readily available if you're going to teach children in 2nd grade about where they live as scientific fact. I mean, honestly, watch this footage. This craft is not in any kind of orbit. This is a panning camera on a track or looking through a telescope, at best. It's really time we woke up.
Well, it's in a way 1,000,000 light years between the flight of the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, but it's not so very long at that when you stop to think of the actual calendar time. But of course, there have been tremendous strides. Nobody could have dreamed, no realist, I guess, could have dreamed at the time of the Wright brothers' flight that less than 70 years later, people would actually be on the surface of the moon.
Here, Frank Reynolds takes a second to sit down with Neil Armstrong. Very interesting and extremely telling answer to this question. It's all about resources.
You're supposed to be, and you are, a pilot, not a philosopher, but you are going to be the first man to land on the moon. You must have thought well beyond the technical, purely scientific aspects of this mission. So I want to ask you really kind of an impossible question, but you're the man to give the answers. What do you think this mission will tell us about man?
If we are successfully able to execute a touchdown and return, it's going to give us an unmeasurable amount of confidence. I think that's probably the greatest result of the flight. It's going to assure those people who have been spending long hours late at night for many years in the computer labs across the street and in the simulations over in the other building and the program offices that the almost staggering technical job that they tackled is in fact possible for man to conquer. And given that confidence, we will then be in a much better position to accurately judge what we should tackle in the future. It won't be marred by a lack of understanding of what can and can't be done. It can be judged on its values.
Do you think it might help us to maybe solve some of our less exotic problems here at home, on Earth?
Well, I certainly hope that that we would take the more successful approaches that have been used in this kind of a program and find ways to apply those approaches to other problems. I don't necessarily agree that just because these people have in this approach have been successful that we should take their resources away from them and give them to some other people who have been less successful in their endeavors.
I get the impression you think we might be able to do both.
Well, I certainly think we can. We're a great country. We have a lot of abilities, and when we direct our efforts toward an understood goal, we usually solve the problems.
You know, I think I was wrong in putting that question to him in the way I phrased it. He is a philosopher, too, as well as a pilot. He's a young man who means what he says and says what he means.
Next, we're going to pay attention to 3 specific answers from the press conference that took place after Apollo 11. First thing you should notice is the demeanor and the stature, the body language of these 3 gentlemen who supposedly just got back from the greatest mission of all time in going to the moon.
At this time, I'd like to introduce the Apollo 11 crew, astronauts Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin. Neil?
It was our pleasure to have participated in one great adventure. It's an adventure that took place not just in the month of July, but rather one that took place in the last decade. We all here and the people listening in today had the opportunity to share that adventure over its developing and unfolding in the past months and years. It's our privilege today to share with you some of the details of that final month of July that was certainly the highlight for the 3 of us of that decade. We're going to divert a little bit from the format of past press conferences and talk about the things that interested us most, in particular the things that occurred on and about the moon. We will use a number of films and slides which most of you have already seen, and with the intent of pointing out some of the things that we observed on the spot which may not be obvious to those of you who are looking at them here from the surface of Earth.
And here's a very interesting comment from Michael Collins about the distance they were from the Earth.
Although we were far from home, we were a lot closer to it than the pure distance might indicate.
Many of us and many other people in many places have speculated on the meaning of this first landing on another body in space. Would each of you give us your estimate of what is the meaning of this to all of us?
I think this answer by Buzz is one of the most telling answers to any question about the moon landings I've ever heard. Listen carefully.
Well, I believe that what this country set out to do was something that was going to be done sooner or later, whether we set a specific goal or not. I believe that from the early space flights we demonstrated a potential to carry out this type of a mission, and again it was a question of time until this would be accomplished. I think the relative ease with which we were able to carry out our mission, which of course came after a very efficient and a logical sequence of flights, I think that this demonstrated that we were certainly on the right track when we took this commitment to go to the moon. I think that what this means is that many other problems perhaps can be solved in the same way by taking a commitment to solve them in a long time fashion. I think that we were timely in accepting this mission of going to the moon. It might be timely at this point to think in many other areas of other missions that could be accomplished.
I just see it as a beginning, not just this flight, but in this program, which has really been a very short piece of human history, an instant in history, the entire program. It's a beginning of a new age.
Well, let's at least all remember Neil for those famous 2 lines when he landed on the moon.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant for mankind.
Not if all goes well, because this is the flight from which man will first set foot on the moon. We almost glibly toss that line away now, man on the moon, but by golly, just think it over.
Apollo 11, everything going well for a landing on the moon, 3 hours, 21 minutes, and 14 seconds from now.
Houston, Eagle is ready to copy. Houston, you're a go for landing, over.
Oh, great go. One of the better goes I've heard in a long time.
Boy, we're go for landing on the moon. Woo.
30 seconds forward. Hey. Contact light. Engine arm on.
We're home.
Man on the moon.
Houston,
Oh, jeez.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Ooh. Oh, boy.
Thank you.
Boy.
Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute.
There's that foot coming down.
There he is. There's a foot coming down the steps. Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong.
We absolutely must learn to know when we're being lied to. When jokers are out there pretending and faking, deceiving, and we still have 90% believing. Walter Cronkite is trash. He's a liar. Here he is, saying how happy he is to be sitting at the right hand of Satan.
World government is the structure necessary for global justice.
I'm in a position to speak my mind, and by God, I'm going to do it. First, we Americans are going to have to yield up some of our sovereignty. That's going to be, to many, a bitter pill. Today, we must develop federal structures on a global level. To deal with world problems, we need a system of enforceable world law, a democratic federal world government. Most important, we should sign and ratify the Treaty for a Permanent International Criminal Court. Pat Robertson has written in a book a few years ago that we should have a world government, but only when the Messiah arrives. He wrote, literally, any attempt to achieve world order before that time must be the work of the devil. Well, join me. I'm glad to sit here at the right hand of Satan.
And so here's what it all boils down to. Are you going to accept images like this as the best evidence that we went to the moon? These images. I mean, come on, guys. NASA is an utter joke. And people are letting them continue to lie to the world. I mean, look at these proofs taken from 30 miles above the surface. Yet anyone with any scientific background will scream and swear that this proves the moon landings. I don't think it even proves that the CGI artist for the LRO is over 8 years old. All you gotta do is go to Skylab, go check out a Hubble repair mission, watch, and you'll finally get it. You need to go back in time and check whether NASA is real or if they're a fraud. Because we missed the boat. People can fool us easily now. In a second, we're going to look at what's possible with green screen, with chroma key. And so the ISS, spacewalks, all that stuff could easily be faked. So what you need to do is you need to open your eye, seek the truth, test the truth, challenge the current going facts, debunk myths, smash on bad evidence, and don't back down to fanboys that can't see that they follow a religion. The first step of the scientific method is to ask questions, so don't stop. I'm not going to stop, but I always do say, don't trust me, don't believe me. But if you want my opinion, there's no way NASA is telling the truth. Look at what is possible now. As long as we keep believing, they'll keep faking it. So it's up to us to make sure they know we aren't as stupid as they think. The days of deception are done. Be kind, don't lie, and open up your mind, because there's truth inside. Check out my Patreon. I could use the support if you want to see more. This has been Jeranism. Till next time.